So I just got done watching ESPN's NFL Live, and they had this really comprehensive segment on the New York Giants and their off-season plans that honestly covered so much ground, I needed a minute to process everything. The show kicked off with a deep dive into the Giants' cap situation before expanding into potential free agent targets and roster construction. And what really caught my attention was when the conversation shifted to their secondary needs, and Jaylon Johnson came up as a perfect fit for what New York is trying to build defensively. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there. Hitting it right now would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal. And honestly, it would mean everything to me. So, do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. Let me walk you through everything that happened on the program because the analysts really went in depth on this one. The panel started by addressing the elephant in the room that every Giants fan wants to understand, which is the cap space situation. Over the cap has New York at around $5 million in space, while Spotrac has them closer to $7 million, which sounds pretty dire until you realize how much flexibility they actually have. The analysts broke down the various moves that could free up significant money, starting with restructuring Brian Burns, which would save over $18 million, and restructuring Andrew Thomas, which adds another $11 million in savings. The discussion about restructures was actually really informative because they explained how these moves work for fans who might not understand the mechanics. When you restructure a contract, you're essentially pushing the cap hit into future years, with larger numbers down the road. It's a great strategy for players like Burns and Thomas, who you want on the team long-term anyway, and the player doesn't sacrifice anything in terms of actual money received. Beyond restructures, cutting players like Bobby Okereke saves $9 million, releasing James Hudson and Devin Singletary adds more savings, and moving on from guys like Graham Gano and Roy Robertson Harris frees up additional cap space. By the time you add it all up, the Giants could realistically have around $60 million to work with heading into free agency. The analysts then pivoted to discussing what the Giants actually need to address with that money, and the list is pretty extensive. They identified defensive tackle as a major need, inside linebacker depth, the right side of the offensive line with question marks around Jermaine Eluemunor and Greg Van Roten, a starting corner, and more offensive playmakers around Jackson Dart. The panel seemed to agree that while there's a solid core in place, this roster needs significant upgrades to compete in the NFC East. The conversation about their own free agents was particularly interesting. The Giants have 3 key players hitting the market in Jermaine Eluemunor, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Cordell Flott. The consensus seemed to be that while the organization would probably like to bring all 3 back, at least one is likely gone because of market dynamics. One analyst made this point that I thought was really astute about how free agency often sees C-level players sign B-level contracts and B-level players get A-level money. Cordell Flott was specifically mentioned as someone who might get overpaid relative to his production, even though he's a solid player who could be good for a long time. That's when the Jaylon Johnson discussion really heated up because he addresses what might be the Giants' most critical need. The panel talked extensively about why Johnson makes so much sense for New York, and the fit seems almost perfect when you break it down. The Giants have historically needed consistency on the perimeter, corners who can be reliable in critical situations, and players who reduce penalties and big plays allowed. Johnson checks every single one of those boxes. One analyst went deep on Johnson's technical attributes and it was genuinely eye-opening. He's a disciplined corner with refined technique, solid positioning on every snap, and emotional control when playing press coverage. That last point is crucial because press coverage requires you to stay composed, even when receivers are trying to bait you into penalties or force you into mistakes. Johnson has the mental makeup to handle that without getting rattled, which makes him excellent for facing the physical receivers in the NFC East, like CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, and Terry McLaurin. The third down reliability aspect was emphasized heavily. A corner of Johnson's profile limits intermediate routes that offenses love to attack on money downs, forces quarterbacks into difficult throws, and increases the chances of turnover. When you have someone who can be trusted in those high-leverage situations, it changes everything about how you can call defense. You can be more aggressive with your blitzes, you can play more man coverage, and you can put pressure on opposing quarterbacks knowing your corner can handle his assignment. The panel discussed how Johnson would provide a foundation for defensive stability that the Giants have been lacking. His presence would stabilize the entire secondary, facilitate coverage adjustments because you have someone you can trust on an island, and reduce the exposure of the pass rush. That last point is important because when corners can't cover, pass rushers don't have time to get home. It's all connected, and adding a true CB1 like Johnson would make everyone around him better. The Bears' cap situation was mentioned as the reason Johnson might actually be available. NFL.com had put out an article listing Johnson as a potential cap casualty because he carries a significant cap hit, and Chicago needs to clear money. The analysts pointed out that just a couple years ago, Johnson was considered one of the best corners in the entire league, with consecutive Pro Bowl selections in 2023 and 2024. He missed most of 2025 with a groin injury, but when healthy, he's been elite. At 26 years old, he could be a boundary corner for the Giants for years to come. The show then expanded into discussing other potential free agent targets that would complement a Johnson signing. Tyler Linderbaum was mentioned as the premier center in this class, and the analysts made a compelling case for pairing him with Andrew Thomas on the left side to create one of the best offensive lines in football. The contract projections ranged from around $18 to $22 million per year, which is significant money, but the panel argued it would be worth it to establish a physical identity and protect Jackson Dart. The discussion about offensive identity was really interesting. One analyst talked about how the Giants should be building around physicality, running the ball downhill, and dominating in the trenches. When you look at how effective Dart was as a runner in college, especially in the red zone, it makes sense to construct an offensive line that can push people around. Linderbaum is exactly that type of player. He's a dominant run blocker who can move defenders off the ball and create running lanes. Romeo Doubs from Green Bay was discussed as a receiver target who would complement Malik Neighbors perfectly. The analysts loved the contrast between the two players, with Neighbors being a dynamic route runner and Doubs excelling in contested catch situations. The statistics they showed were impressive. Over the last 3 years, Doubs has been targeted 76 times in contested situations and caught over 52% of them, ranking in the top 10 in the league. For a team that needs a red zone target and a 50-50 ball winner, Doubs fits perfectly. The contract projections for Doubs ranged from around $48 million over 4 years on the low end to $61 million on the high end. The panel seemed to think somewhere around $12 to $15 million annually was the right number, and they argued that would be money well spent for a receiver entering his prime at 25 years old. The offensive line discussion continued with Isaac Sumalo being mentioned as an ideal right guard target. He's 32 years old with experience playing for both the Eagles and Steelers, and the analysts praised him as a violent football player who finishes blocks. The imagery they used was that once he gets his hands on you, you're not getting them off. For a team trying to establish a physical identity, that's exactly the archetype you want. On the defensive side, beyond Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day was discussed as a run-stopping defensive tackle who could pair with Dexter Lawrence. The analysts showed statistics about his stop rate ranking 4th among interior defensive linemen and his ability to generate tackles for loss or no gain. The connection to Deinard Wilson was mentioned as a potential factor, and the price tag of $6 to $8 million per year seems reasonable for what he'd provide. The show also touched on veteran additions who might not be splash signings, but would bring valuable leadership. Calais Campbell, at 39 years old, was mentioned because of his connection to John Harbaugh from their Baltimore days. At 6'8" and 315, he's still producing with 16 quarterback hits and multiple sacks. Plus, he brings accountability and a winning mentality to any locker room. Christian Kirk was discussed as a potential slot receiver who could replace Wan'Dale Robinson if he signs elsewhere. The analysts acknowledged that Kirk isn't quite the player he used to be, but at 29 years old, he can still separate in man coverage and had some big moments in the playoffs. Pairing him with Neighbors and Daubs would give Jackson Dart a legitimate receiving core. But throughout all these discussions, the conversation kept coming back to how Jaylon Johnson would be the anchor of this defensive rebuild. The panel made the point that you can add all the offensive weapons you want, but if you can't stop people, you're not winning championships. Johnson represents the kind of foundational piece that transforms a secondary from a weakness into a strength. The scheme fit was discussed extensively. The Giants need a corner who can handle press coverage responsibilities without getting beat consistently, who understands leverage and positioning, and who has the discipline to avoid penalties in crucial moments. Johnson's technique is described as refined, meaning he wins with fundamentals rather than just athleticism. That translates well to the NFL level because athletic advantages diminish when everyone is elite. The emotional control aspect was interesting to hear discussed. The analysts talked about how some corners struggle mentally when they give up a big play, and it affects them for the rest of the game. Johnson apparently has the opposite temperament, where he can shake off a bad rep and come back even stronger. For a young Giants team that might face adversity during the season, having that kind of steady presence in the secondary would be invaluable.